Hi, this is Randy Hollenbeck, and this is the Music Roundtable. Today on the show, we have producer Dave Hillis.
How do we get out of here? It seems useless. I know there is peace, but there is pain. Where do we get our strength to be ourselves? It seems useless. I know there is peace, but there is pain.
Could you give us an example of what the difference is between a producer and an engineer?
Oh yeah, all right. Well, so that's an interesting question, especially this day and age, because depending what style, the word producer now can mean a number of different things than it did, say, 20, 30 years ago. So, um, in the world that I'm usually in the rock world, and kind of pre-hip hop culture, it was more about a producer wasn't sometimes, but not necessarily an engineer. So a producer would be somebody who was in the studio doing everything to make a record come together, from watching the clock, making sure that things were getting done on time and within budget, to performances, how people were talking to each other, the communication between everybody in the room, arrangements of the songs, instrumentation, uh, performances, kind of being that extra guy out of the band that's not in the band, but that fifth member, sixth member, whatever it might be, that's kind of being the outside ear that's pulling it all together and making it at a whole, making the whole thing work. And in the back in the day, and keeping the label happy. And so there would be label representatives who would want to work with certain producers, knowing that they're going to get something on within their budget delivered right, that they were going to know was going to be on the radio, was going to be whatever they were particularly after from that artist or group. Nowadays, it's kind of changed a bit. A producer could be somebody who makes beats and does small loop type instrumentational stuff that somebody else might sing over. So, I mean, it's just kind of bled into some different meanings. But when working with a rock band, or maybe even a solo artist to that degree, it's the all encompassing thing. An engineer, like I said, sometimes a producer is an engineer as well, more likely these days. Um, but an engineer is the guy who's actually putting the sounds to tape, now Pro Tools or digital format, but responsible running the equipment basically. And when it was in bigger studios with recording consoles, that was a guy who knew how to get things, use the recording console, get it to tape, all the technical issues with tape and EQing and compression and miking and mic positions and things like that, and would be following the producer's lead and taking care of the technical stuff, so the producer didn't have to deal with that. The producer was dealing with the performances and everybody in the room, and wouldn't have time to deal with all the technical aspects. Now it's more all in one job, mostly. So you're running the computer and you're kind of producing these days. Not necessarily, but that those jobs have kind of blurred the lines over the last couple decades. So, but that's the main difference.
Now, let's dig into some of your background, how you got started. I know you were in a band when you were in, was it Brooklyn? You grew up?
Well, I grew up in Brooklyn, but really wasn't playing with bands until I got out to the Seattle area. So in New York, I happened to grow up next door to a guy named who went by the name Pete Steele, who was in a band called Typo Negative later on, and before that in a band called Carnival. and we kind of had this parallel life. Like he literally lived next door to me, attended my birthday parties when I was a little kid, the whole bit, and I moved 3,000 miles away, and not keeping in contact with it or anything, but we somehow ran this parallel life of like getting into heavy metal, and then into different things, and even to passing each other on tours, and landing. Like one time, I was in a group that was featured in Guitar World, and they were on the same page in Guitar World. It was just funny things like that. But seeing, he was a couple years older than me, and seeing him play, I kind of saw, I was like, wow, this is cool. I want to do that. And so by the time I got out to Seattle area, I was kind of devastated moving. You know, it's a big deal when you move that age. You have friends, you're leaving friends. And so one of the big promises was that I was going to get guitar lessons. And so by the time I was out in that area, I started getting guitar lessons and growing up on hard rock and then heavy metal and some punk rock. So then that led, you know, by high school I was starting bands and doing all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, and then I you know, was into, you know, heavy metal and stuff because that was the guitar player stuff, you know, anything hard rocker, because that's where all the cool guitar players playing was. And that led to a band I formed called MACE that we got on Metal Massacre 5 compilation. And at the same time, a local compilation called Northwest Metal Fest, the same song. I just submitted them out of sheer being naive and bold and young and stupid and fearless, and it was accepted on both of them, and that was the beginning of kind of me getting into the whole thing. I wasn't even in like cover bands or anything yet. I'd written this song, like I went right to like being on the compilation, and then we were like trying to make our own record, so I kind of skipped all that, which, you know, I probably would have been better if I probably would have learned some cover songs first and got better at my craft that way. But I just jumped right into writing, and you know, so some of the early stuff's kind of really bad. But in some way, we made a mark. I think just out of sheer energy and audacity, as it were. So yeah, so that's how that started. And then I was just, you know, going into recording studios, and then, you know, then I wanted to record, then I wanted to know what the guy was doing behind the board, and then you know, so it was just constantly trying to grasp more knowledge so I could kind of control my whole destiny, as it were.
You would go into the studios and record some of your songs and stuff, and then you would just ask the producer, "Hey, can you show me some stuff?" Or is that how it got started?
Kind of. So I would go into, like, I mean, it started any kind of recording studio I saw locally, like around me, and they were like little 8-track reel-to-reel places, and I just really had no idea. Started like that, and then I would go to the next one and a bigger one, and then by the time we went to a real 24-track studio and did some recording, I wasn't really interested yet in recording myself yet. I was more about being, you know, guitar god or whatever. I just wanted to be on stage and play. But then I started hearing, especially in Seattle, all of a sudden some good bands were popping up, and we were going, already venturing off to San Francisco and stuff to play, because that's where a lot of the heavy metal stuff was coming out of. We weren't really so much Seattle bound. We were like, get me out of Seattle, which is amazing, because 2 years later, Seattle like was blowing up a couple years later. But and then I was, you know, then I started noticing, as I was just getting more older and involved, I was like, you know, these records don't sound good, you know, and everybody else is just sounding a lot better. And I was like, so I started learning that, and I got myself a 4-track, and you know, so certain bands had broken up. I'd already moved on a little bit, and I went to London Bridge Studios, where I ended up working later on, and saw what was going on there, and then actually booked some of my own time with somebody there, and I went, oh wow, now I see how things are supposed to sound, and then I just was totally enthralled on the recording side of it, but still like really wanted I was still a band guy and a writer, and still wanted to do all that. But I definitely knew that I had to learn more about recording, and so that's where that started. And then the twists and turns, and then I ended up having an opportunity to work there, and then that's when I really got sucked in.
You reached out to London Bridge and said, "Hey, can I get a job here?" Or how'd that happen?
No, not like that. I went there. Uh, I actually went there a couple times. I'd met somebody else that worked there about maybe producing a record. Um, Nobody that you know name really know the name of, but he did a lot of tech work and stuff out of London Bridge, and then his name was Kurt Bujak, and then excuse me, and then I was there again for a Queensryche autograph party, and that was there, and I just went, and I was just impressed by the place. And then being just from around Seattle, sharing a lot of the same rehearsal rooms or places where we'd rehearse or go to the same parties or being friends with that or different bands, a lot of musical chairs going on in Seattle at the time. There's bands forming and breaking up. Somebody had played with that guy, a lot of that. Um, I'd heard some demos that were being done by the early Alice in Chains and Mother Love Bone stuff, and that was done at, they were coming out of London Bridge, and I'm like, wow, those sound like records. So I thought I better just get in there and book some time. So I did on just a project I just started. Just wrote some songs. It didn't end up doing anything. Trying to put a band together, and but I was friends with all those guys, and like I said, we'd run. We were all part of that same community. And so when I started hearing some demos that were coming out of London Bridge, I knew that that place things sound like a record, and obviously people had success. They were getting signed and stuff. But what happened is, so I booked some time to do something there with a band that didn't even last. We kind of did some, but it got me into the studio. And a couple weeks later, I was out at a club called the Vogue, which was very popular hangout for all those early Seattle bands. Like everybody either hung out there, you played there, or both. It was just, everybody was there every night of the week. That was like the heart of Seattle at that time. Um, and I was there, and a couple weeks after recording there, and Rick Parasher, one of the brothers, the producer who did Pearl Jam 10 and many other records, Temple of Dog and all that, happened to be there, and he recognized me from being at the studio. He didn't work with us. I worked actually with a guy named Don Gilmore, who was his then assistant, who later went on to do Linkin Park and Eve 6 and a number of other things. But so he goes, "Hey, how'd it go?" I said, "You were at the studio, right? How'd you like it?" "Oh, I loved it. It was great. Da da da." And he goes, and I found out that was Don's first day there, or first day alone without Rick. And I was like, I didn't even know that at the time. I guess that's why I got the studio cheap. But so that went on, and we started talking, and he said, "Hey, what are you doing later?" And I go, "What do you tell me? What are we doing?" And he said, "Hey," he knew that I knew everybody. He could see that I was pretty social and knew everybody. He goes, "Why don't you invite some people back? Let's go back to the studio." And I was like, "Sure, let's go do that." So we did. I invited some people, and we went back. And we were just hanging out in the studio, talking, doing all that. I was looking around at microphones and this and that. He saw that I had an interest, and he happened to say, "Yeah, Don's moving on. He's not going to be working with me, so I'm going to be looking for a new assistant." And so I just heard that and jumped on it, called him relentlessly for weeks, and finally got a meeting with him. And I came in with all these demos I'd done and this and that, and a whole mapped out spiel I was going to give to get this job, because I thought, oh, this is going to be it. I'd worked at record stores and all these other things, and I'm like, this is going to be a great job for me getting to where I want to be. And he was completely uninterested in anything I had to play for him. Didn't want to hear anything. And he's just like, "Well, what do you want to do? You're going to be able to put in the time?" Like, just really strange questions. And then he said, "All right, well, Here, and he handed me a physics book, which I actually have on my bookshelf to this day. And I'm like, physics book? I'm like, what? I want to do rock and roll, man. What is this? You know, last thing I want, a physics book. And, you know, later I realized with frequencies and sound and that, you know, it's just a very Rick thing to do, as I found out later on. And then told me when to show up. When I showed up, and we were working on Temple of Dog mixes. So it was like I was boom right in. And then after that, it was a band called Love and Ice from Portland, who came up to Seattle for the same reason. They'd heard the Alice in Chains demos, and and they were signed to Interscope, a big record deal with Interscope. Interscope was a new label, but they were, so he just threw it, and then he's like, okay, here we go. And we're like in the fire, and I'm like working on a major label record for Interscope. So, and it was just kind of like, he didn't really show me anything, teach me. He was just kind of he just like, and it was intimidating, scary. I got this amazing Neve console and a patch bay. And I was just like completely confused. I was like, you know, he knew that I knew about guitars and guitar pedals and sounds like that. So he let me kind of run with that. And so that's kind of how our working relationship started going. He wasn't really a rock guy per se, and he was getting all this rock work. And I think me being a rock dude coming in from rock was like, okay, you know, he knows. And I knew most of the bands that were coming in. I didn't know Love and Ice, but a lot of the other guys I knew. So there was like a camaraderie. Rick wasn't very much about camaraderie. He ran the show. He did things his way, and he didn't really. I remember Stone Gossard from when we were doing Pearl Jam would say sometimes to Rick, just pretend you like us. Just pretend. Because he goes, I'm not here to like you. I'm here to make a great record, but I don't have to like you. I like you outside of this, but I don't have to like you in here. And that's just Rick. He was very like that. And he just liked to, it was more of a game he liked to play with people. And that's kind of worked for him as a producer. You know, he was able to keep people at arm's length and second guessing, and it's kind of how he controlled the situation. So for me, though, it was kind of cool because, you know, I knew their language they were talking. I knew what guitar, oh, we should try this, or let's do, you know, I knew where they were going with their guitar tones or this and that. And they looked at me as kind of, you know, same, you know, dude from, you know, it's Dave. You know, it wasn't like, I wasn't intimidating at all. So that's kind of how, so that, and then I was sucked in, you know, and then we got, I mean, a lot of people ask me, well, did you know these were going to be big records and all this stuff? And I was like, had no idea. Honestly, not to sound like a jerk, but just didn't really care. I got this job, but to me, it was more about me getting somewhere. And then, so eventually I'll be recording my own record. And I was trying to learn skills that would help me. So when I was seeing my, you know, friends locally doing so well, I'm like, you know, I was kind of jealous half the time. Like, why aren't I making a record? You know, damn, we're making their record. You know, but it was still fun, and I was learning, of course, and all that. But I wasn't thinking, oh, this is going to be the next big record or anything. It's just like, oh, you know, let's get through this. And I was difficult, and I was working the whole time. So, and nobody was famous yet, so it wasn't like I had this job where these famous people came in the room and we were recording them, and so so it was odd. And then as it developed, it even took, you know, even a few years after all that stuff blew up, where I still had to really realize that it was that big of a deal, you know. Even decades later, I'm still getting it like, oh, wow, that really was that big of a deal. Like, it just couldn't quite, we were way too close to it, you know. It was kind of hard to fathom it.
Now, you were there when they first came in to record 10 from the beginning.
Yeah, I was there when we did the Mookie Blaylock demos. So they had done Mother Love Bone there, and I wasn't working there yet. I'd gone by there a few times because I knew one of the guys, and of course I knew, yeah, and so I knew that was going on. But like I said, that was kind of when I was aware of that there was stuff happening there, and actual major labels were doing stuff in Seattle, because it was just, you know, before that, and I'm talking, you know, a year or so before Mother Love Bone was a thing, everybody was dying to get to LA. You know, there was nothing in Seattle. Nobody thought there was anything in Seattle. And for us, a little bit earlier than that, the mid '80s, there it was all about getting to San Francisco because that's where Metallica and everybody came out of. So it's like you were trying to leave Seattle, and then all of a sudden everybody was coming to Seattle.
Yeah, because San Francisco was the rock scene, basically, where everybody was breaking in at, and then all of a sudden Seattle blows up out of nowhere.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, there's some things behind the scenes there. I think people don't really realize, or what kind of helped benefit that scene to happen is that when like Alice in Chains and Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, those bands, they were affiliated with Kelly Curtis Management and Susan Silver and Ken Deans, and really Kelly and Ken Deans, they'd come from the '70s, where they were all involved with Heart and things like that. So they had had a run at how things were really done. So I think it was very lucky and really lucky for those guys to be hooked up with actual management that knew how to deal with actual major labels from LA or New York. So I think otherwise, like, there could have been a different turn of events, how all that would have happened. And they were smart in how they played it, and a lot of timing, of course, and just great bands, great music. And it was at the end of the hair metal thing. I mean, it was a perfect storm, really, in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about when you were recording 10 if you knew that it was going to be a big album, but you kind of explained that.
I remember I was out once at this big thing, and what was her name? Uh, oh, I can't remember her name now. Really, like president of Epic or something, like really big wig, and she was like, oh, this must have been amazing while you're in there, and did you know it was gonna be this big? And I felt so obliged to say yes. I feel like, but I wanted to say no. But and I mean, you got to understand too. Like me and Stone, we joke all the time. Our humor, me and McCree. There's a lot of humor and joking, and we knew each other from party. I mean, just so weren't thinking like that. And honestly, I was confused when Eddie came up and we were demoing and stuff. Um, like I say, it was the end of that era out of LA. The Love Bone stuff was very different. And when I heard what they were doing, I was into a completely different thing personally at the time. I was really into a lot of stuff from England, like almost Britpop stuff and things like that. I was on a totally different artistic journey there. And when they were playing and recording and hashing out the stuff, it sounded like Bad Company or something to me. It sounded like classic rock or something. And at that time, I just didn't get it, nor did I care to get it. I was just like, I was interested in what I was working on and getting great tones and sounds and all that. And I didn't realize what was in front of me, a really, band forming that was going to end up being as good as they were. A lot of it's all hindsight. But I'm kind of, in a way, though, I'm glad it was like that because it was all honest. There was no, like, I mean, the pressure was just doing a good job because Rick was running the show, and he was a hard boss. That was the pressure. Those guys had pressure on them probably more than I realized. And they were super, I mean, those guys in the studio, it was just like all work, like there's people that tell me a crazy story about Pearl Jam. There's no crazy stories. There's like, they came and played all day and recorded, and no partying, no nothing, no visitors, no anything. It was just work, record all day, work things out. And Rick was that way too. So it was. I mean, there was pressure to do good jobs, and everybody was really concentrated on what they were doing. But it was also, like I said, it just didn't. Just being unaware of what it was ending up to be made it, I think, just more genuine and honest and how it all happened.
you guys recorded with tape, not computers back then, so you couldn't make any mistakes.
Yeah, that's the thing. I still have this weird belief. It's like, when did all those records have sold, 5, 10. I mean, Pearl Jam sold what, 13 million, like all those and then now a giant record sells, a couple million. It's like a lot of records. I mean, it's a lot of records for anybody. But I'm saying, when did it all change? It seemed to change right after we stopped recording the tape. All of a sudden, the amount of sales seemed to go. I don't know if there's real, substance to that or not. But yeah, it's funny to look back on it. There's no, everything was taped. There's no Pro Tools. There's no fixing anything in Pro Tools. There's no, we did it all the old school way. And you listen to them and they sound great.
They still hold up today, you know.
Yeah. But like let me say too, with Pearl Jam in particular, um, they it was mostly, it was recorded live, of course, and then we would do, overdubs and all that type of stuff as you would do. But they were very intent on getting a feel and the take. We ran through. I mean, there was just towers of 2-inch tape that we used. Like their tape budget was pretty big. They bought a lot of tape. We went through a lot of tape to where they would just keep doing another take. And then it was like now this is by the time after the demos, and then we're into the actual record. But I remember we needed to take like a week or two just to go through, just to listen back to the takes and take notes of which ones people, what version of this song are we going to use, because there were so many takes of just to get that right one, the right feel. It's all about feel. So those are things that just aren't done today. You don't do that. People don't.
They recorded everything live with like the drums, the guitars, and the bass, and everything was all recorded live. Was that how they did it?
Yeah, it was just they played like a group. Um, they Eddie wouldn't sing on every take or anything like that, but yeah, they recorded as a band, and so everybody felt, and then we'd go and fix little parts, as far as guitars or just overdub more, but there wasn't even a ton of overdubs. It was so basic rock and roll stuff.
Don't hang around to say it's okay. Time will heal itself, and don't drag the moment over my fears. It's sadly the best to let the secret die alone. And don't call on me, it will be torture. Can't you see? I'll try. Oh, why? You said your goodbye, now take it all away from here. It's all I can do not to think of you, so I'll pretend.
You did the Alice in Chains Dirt demos?
Yeah, I don't know what they're called. We went the way I remember it, but who knows what I wasn't in privy to know everything that the labels were doing or what was being said back and forth between the band. I heard everything secondhand. I'm just a guy in there, recording, engineering and stuff. But we, from what I remember, we were doing the Dirt record. And from what I get, from how I think it went down, I mean, maybe somebody could correct me in Jerry Cantrell or something. He's never said anything different though. But is that we did that, and I think that the label wasn't totally sold on it yet, or wasn't sure about it, and I think, especially back in that time period, labels were very apt to use whoever was doing well. So like if you were going to have a song mixed, they'd have to use the guy who's got the hit song on the radio right now, or who's the hot producer right now. And I think really because Dave Jordan had produced the first record, I think they wanted to see what Dave Jordan would do. And I think for some reason they weren't using Dave at first, and they were going to use Rick. And I think the label kind of stood, and I think they just ended up re-recording it with Dave Jordan. I did notice that Dave Jordan did a cool thing where he slowed the tempos down, which ended up making that record sound even heavier, I think. Which became one of their, most, that was a big record for them. So, but I think but the version we did was, I thought it was pretty cool too. Although it kind of went to the abyss. I don't really know what happened with that. There's one story that happened that, while we were working on that, Mike Starr, the bass player, wanted a cassette that he could take home, and Rick had already went home, and I'd usually be there after Rick and before, just doing all the other stuff. And I called Rick. I go, what do you want me to do? Because sometimes he didn't, want copies going out or whatever, and I didn't want to mess up the board. Doing a mix or something if he had things. And so I said, what do you want me to do? He goes, just make him just go ahead and make him a mix off the monitor section of the board. And I said, okay. So I did. And I just made a cassette. Like I didn't put it to DAT or anything that we used at the time. One copy. And I gave it to him, and he loved it. And a few years later, he kept talking about it over the years, and people have brought it up before in interviews. And that was his favorite version, and it was nothing that I did special to it or anything. It was just that nobody did anything to it, so it was raw. It was just really raw what they recorded, and he liked it. And it was different versions from Dirt, and so there might have been a different energy to it or whatever. But I get asked all the time, you don't have a copy? Is there? And I keep telling you, there is no other copy. At the time, I didn't think it would be important to make another copy. I just was making a cassette to get Mike home and out of there so I could get home before 3 in the morning, It was that kind of thing. Nobody thought about, man, I should make an extra copy because this is going to be a super famous record one day. Or, it's something hard to find because it's, So that record, I think, just got treated as a demo of the record because then they ended up redoing it. I believe they used, Wood we did completely separate, and then they ended up putting that on the Dirt record. Because Wood, when they came to do Wood, it was just I remember getting a call, Alice is coming in, and I'm like, oh, okay. And went there, and it was when they were out on the road. Now they're big, and I'm like, oh, they're I know now that they're big, and they show with this giant truck of gear, and I'm like, holy cow, it's unusual to see that coming into the studio, big semi type thing. And they just came in one day with that song idea. I remember we only had, should I keep going? Oh, I lost your camera. So Rick, I said, what do you want me to do, Rick? And he said, just do our usual setup, the usual mic setup and all that. And boom, they play the song, and we mixed and did that all in just that one day. And then that was Wood. It was just it was a song. That was very the way Jerry worked. I mean, with Pearl Jam, it was really a band thing. You had your main guys with Stone and Jeff, but with Alice, man, it was Jerry ran that show. And if he had an idea, he knew how to capture it, and was very comfortable at the studio since he'd been there so much and recorded. And so that was just a one-day deal, boom. And we really did our most simplest mic setup and generic kind of thing, which kind of shows off that studio because that is the sound of that studio, that big type of drum sound you hear in that. So yeah, but that's one of those things where they just came, boom, knocked it out, bam. And then they could work months on a rec. The same with Temple of Dog was all done, recorded in 10 days. So it's like, yeah, basically. I think that was some of Rick's best work because when he didn't have time, it was really good because he's such a perfectionist and stuff that I think sometimes he would over. Well, I know. I mean, I made a record with him, so I know he would sometimes go in all his brilliance. He sometimes, man, if you gave him too much time, he's one of those artists that couldn't stop. He would just keep polishing it, polishing it. So I think sometimes it was just best when he got the initial recording.
You guys also did SAP there too?
Yeah, we did. Yeah, so the ones I worked on was Dirt Wood, which was like I said, was just a separate session, and then Sap I worked on. Now they did other stuff there and other stuff with Rick, but those were the ones that I was engineering on.
The EP only took what, 4 days to do that one?
I don't know. I don't remember. Good question. I know it wasn't long, and another one of those kind of Alice in Chains kind of they just I never knew what they were doing. Like when Pearl Jam would come in or something, they were very they communicate. Everything was planned and written out. Like you kind of knew what was going on. Jeff was there making sure the credits were right. I mean, they were like on it. Alice in Chains, they were like, they were on their own time and their own plateau, as it were. And so, and then I ended up. I probably hung out with Jerry later on in Los Angeles more than I did even in Seattle. And I found out then, especially he's more successful than he just kind of he's got that situation where he just has an idea or whatever. He'll rent out a studio, go in and take time, or he'll just rent a studio out and listen to music. I mean, he'll so like if they were, for me it would just be Alice in Chains is coming in today. Okay, and so I don't know for how long or what, and you just run with whatever Jerry would want to do, really. Even when I remember, the orchestra showing up, which was always a big deal for me being the engineer there, because I had to deal with an orchestra being there, and that's a lot of people, a lot of microphones to be set up, a lot of technical issues that have to be ready, and they're always like union players, and there's a whole different thing that you deal with than you usually do with a rock band coming in. So I'm like, what? Yeah, the Seattle Symphony's coming in. I'm like, okay. And who's the conductor? And like, we don't know. And I'm like, okay. And then Jerry would go out there with his guitar and talk to the orchestra. And orchestra players don't respond to that well. They want to see their music in front of them and a conductor. They're not used to some long-haired rock guy telling them what to play and how to figure out. It's like this. You have to play. But he just do that. He was fearless like that. Just go out there and do that. So dealing. Definitely two different ways of working. But another thing that always Alice seemed like maybe they'd be more wild, but in the studio, it was full on concentration and work, just getting it done. Just really dead on focused.
When you were working on any of those albums, not one song stuck out to you like, oh, that's going to be big someday.
I was more about, I thought Wood was good. I thought Wood was good. I remember thinking, go back with Pearl Jam. I remember, so I'd be like sitting there late at night. Rick would be gone usually in the later hours, so it'd just be me and the band. And I'm just sitting in there, and I got all of Eddie's lyrics. I look back and I'm thinking, damn, I wish we had cell phones there with cameras, because the pictures I would have been great. I'd have all Eddie's lyrics spread across the console with my feet up, with the talkback remote in my hand while they're playing. And I was thinking, I don't know, I think it was Black or something, maybe. And I was thinking, you know, oh, this is a good song. I like this one. I like the ballad. Yeah, this is a good one. I go, you know, he's a good lyricist, I guess. I mean, I was so like not like realizing what it's like if I had Leonard Cohen's writings in front of me and not really realizing they were so. I just, you know, but I look back now laughing like, you know, he's a pretty good lyricist now, you know, in hindsight. But I remember seeing all his lyrics out and I was kind of jogging through them because I needed them for where I was going to punch in. That's why we'd have the lyrics out. And, you know, but you're so, plus then I'm not even really reading them as lyrics. I'm like looking, where's my next punch? And I'm counting my timing where I'm coming in and coming out on a punch on the tape, you know, where where we're fixing a vocal or something. So, you know, a lot of times you're not really, especially as the engineer, you're not really living the music at the time. You're not really getting the art sometimes. And I'm so hyper listening to pitch or guitar tones or things like that. Like I notice now, like being a producer now, you know, when I'm doing a band, I'm first listening to their demos as music, you know, and then I do pre-production with them where I'm really studying their arrangements and the song itself and the lyrics and all those things. And so, now I more realize then where if I was just engineering, I'm kind of in a different space. So, like I said, now I kind of do both, but, and plus, like I said, then they were too close to me. They were too, my, what do you call it? My peers. And, you know, it wasn't like somebody that I looked up to coming in. Then I would have thought I would have probably had a whole different frame of mind. But, and I was young, you know, had my own up in my own head. We all were then. That's why that music scene was good. I think everybody involved was like so um, ambitious and determined to like kind of do it and make it, as it were. I mean, um, and we all kind of were competitive in a good nature. You know, there was like you'd always help other bands or whatever, but we all kind of looked at each other as on the same level. So you were like, I was probably thinking about what song I had, right? You know what I mean? So
Back then, where it was like transitioning from like hair metal to grunge, I remember back then somebody that I knew, he was from Seattle. He's like, you have to check out this band Nirvana, and Nevermind just came out, and I listened to it, and I was like, I just didn't understand it at the time. It took me a while to transition from that hair metal genre over to grunge, but I finally got it when I got to like Alice in Chains and stuff, and Soundgarden started coming out. But it took a while to transition from that.
yeah, you know, it was interesting for me because a couple years older than most of the guys. We're all around the same age, but I kind of had a little bit of an earlier start with that than they did. So I was by the time like I'd already done the heavy metal stuff to thrash metal stuff to punk rock stuff, so I'd already kind of like was over it, and so I started looking towards other things, everything from like industrial music and goth music, and everything was coming out of England and Britpop. I was like already in a different thing. So when grunge and that turnover was happening in Seattle, I was kind of like blasé about it. I was like, you know, I just wasn't in it. I should have been. I probably would have been a lot more successful musician. I was just not. That wasn't what I wanted to do. But I saw it blowing up around me. And you speak of Nirvana, like I saw Nirvana at the same club, the Vogue, that I was talking about earlier, just as some band. Like I looked up, oh, who's that? And like, you know, 30 people in the club and whatever. And I would just keep talking to somebody and like probably left while they were playing, like just not even a clue. I remember a friend I had the Bleach record. He said, oh, it's the greatest thing ever. And I was going, really? You know? I was like, oh, okay. You know, that wasn't. I would have. I remember at the same time I might have been listening to Big Black or something like that. That I thought was cool, or all these other things. But I wasn't purposely not liking Seattle bands. I just wasn't. None of them really hit me that hard. I wasn't like a huge Sub Pop fan or any of that. And then I thought it was funny seeing how, it was very clicky in Seattle area. So, I mean, Pearl Jam was definitely not a Sub Pop band, but they were derivative of it to some way because Stone and Jeff were in Green River. There's all these blends and things moving around. And then when it got bigger, the media just put a giant umbrella on it all and called it grunge. And then everybody was just grunge. Everything from Candlebox to Blood Circus or one of the other, or Screaming Tree or any, or Mudhoney. Mudhoney to me was the only band I thought that was actually grunge or fit the name grunge. But so and even then Mark was more punk rock. He had Ziggy Pop. I mean, there was so, and I thought that about the whole Seattle scene. Even my part of it. There were so many influences going on. It was such a blend of different things. And everybody was, like I said, very ambitious, and there was such a vibrant music scene and rehearsal rooms and places where you could do it and places where you could play that it seemed so natural to be doing it. Not unlike the LA scene, except it just wasn't the hair metal stuff as much, although there was a hair metal scene in Seattle too, 88, 89, 80, so there was plenty of that there too. So it's just, those certain elements that took off, and I think Soundgarden obviously brought a lot of that flavor to it too. But there's a big heavy metal scene. There was all kinds of stuff coming out of there. But those ones that the labels got a hit on. Nirvana to me too, for the longest time didn't seem like a Seattle band to me because you didn't see them around Seattle, like where I talked about earlier, like if I would see everybody from Pearl Jam and Alice and all these guys at the local parties and clubs and things like that. Everybody knew each other. Nirvana they weren't a Seattle. They came from Aberdeen. I never saw them anywhere except the Vogue when I saw them play, and I didn't watch. And then they went to, as soon as they did the one record, they did Bleach in Seattle, but then they did their other record with Wisconsin with Butch Vig. So it's like they never were really a Seattle band to me, except that they were on Sub Pop. They were on Sub Pop, and they kind of had that thing. But there were other bands in Sub Pop that weren't from Seattle too that all had that vibe. So which I ended up working with. I ended up working with Afghan Wigs. They're from Cincinnati. And they were a Sub Pop band. So who knows? I don't know. It was a vibrant music scene. That's what it was.
After you got done at the studios out there, where did you go from there? Did you open up your own studio after you were assistant out there, or what?
I look back at it now, it's like a lot happened in like 4 years, which is so, to me now, 4 years goes by like this, and I can't believe how much had happened in 4 years. But from like 90 to 94, I worked on those records with Rick. We had this great run happening. And then in 94, I got signed to Island Records on a project I just did on a whim with a vocalist named April Devereaux, a girl singer that at a London Bridge party, I was playing a guitar, and she started singing, and then somebody said, "You guys should do something together." And I called her up, and I got her number, called her up, and we just did a quick demo. And it's funny, I was trying to keep it away from Rick. I didn't want Rick to hear it. I wanted to do it on my own. And plus I thought he wouldn't like it, and he would like school me on it and tell me all the things I did wrong. So I was like, I didn't want him to hear it. And I had it in my truck, in my tape deck, and he borrowed my truck. He goes, "Dude, I gotta borrow your truck." And he took off to go to the store or something. I'm like, "Oh man, I left that tape in there. I hope he doesn't listen to it." Sure enough, he did. He came back and said he really liked it and all this. I'm like, no way, I can't believe it. So anyway, long story short, we went to South by Southwest together, and At that time, we started getting a manager kind of helping us with the studio because of the success of Pearl Jam and stuff. And so that particular tape got chopped a little bit, and before you knew it, we had the same kind of Seattle thing. People came to see us, and we signed a deal with Island. So I ended up taking a little hiatus from the recording studio. Spent like a year there. Well, I didn't take a hiatus from the studio. I took a hiatus actually working there. So then we wrote and recorded a record that Rick produced. So that was strange because now he was my producer, but I was the artist. So that was interesting. So it was a cool experience. We got to do a lot of things, but the record, radio didn't pick up on it. Before you knew it, we were dropped, and so that was kind of this big roller coaster. Like we signed a really nice deal. We got to do all kinds of fun stuff before we even got a shot to like do anything with the record. We were dropped, and it was like over. I'm like, well, that was fast. And so I went back into engineering, recording again. So then and so I was kind of independent from London Bridge, and I was looking for other work, and I was trying, I was thinking I got to get to LA. So I ended up moving to Los Angeles, and then just kind of hustling on my own, trying to become independent of London Bridge. But I'd always still kind of go back there and do stuff or whatever. So I was just kind of doing the Los Angeles, Seattle thing, and that's when I started working with Afghan Wigs and a few other things. Then early 2000s, I went over to London and did something with James Blunt. So I did some pop stuff with that, but that was another one just came out of nowhere. He was another. I tend to get these guys, they become super famous, but they were nobody when I'm working with it, so you don't know at the time. So when I started working with him, and these are all things that somehow came from all the stuff I'd done in the past, meeting certain people, meeting the right, certain A&R guy, or management that I knew that worked at that. It was all these different things, and you're just always out there trying to connect. And when I was in London, I'd connected with a guy named Declan Morel, who went on to be like president of Universal Publishing, and he was just a small time guy at the time in LA, and saw him in London, and I was like, "Oh, what are you doing, man? I'm looking for work here." And he goes, "I'm vice president of." I'm like, "What?" And he goes, "Yeah." And hey, I got somebody you want to meet. And I went to EMI Publishing, and who James was signed to, and I was meeting all these English artists, lots of cool things, and then I met James at a pub, and just some guy. I was like, okay. He had nothing out yet, just demos. So I just went into the studio with him and helped him with what became the first record. And I remember bringing it back and playing it for some people at home. And I liked, there was 5 other artists that I thought huge. I'm like, oh, I'm so excited being over in London. It's great. I don't know what's in the water over here, but everybody's so good. And there's this one too. And then everybody goes, that's the one guy. That guy's going to be good. Oh, this guy, James, he's a really nice guy, but I don't know. I'm like pushing all these other ones. So of course, James was the one that was huge. So it shouldn't be an A&R guy, obviously. Yeah, so, I just did that. And then the more that went on, the more I was doing that. And the older I got, I was, felt studio was definitely more where I was enjoying myself and I was feeling more artistic. I was happy that I got a shot at the record deal one more time and kind of got the big label deal and all that. And it was over, I was kind of like, it wasn't all what it was cracked up to be anyway. And I found that I really kind of enjoyed what I was doing in the studio. So, and I was now so invested in it, and so became a part of everything I did. And I was addicted to the equipment and the gear and all that. That I just said, I'm just going to stay focused on this. But I was lucky enough to where I always felt what kind of helped with what I do is that I kind of been on both sides of the glass. I've been in bands and I've had that side of it, and I've had this other side and watched bands come from nothing and be huge. So in the whole long story of it now, I see how it all makes sense. But it didn't seem like I was taking such a trajectory path that I wanted to, but now I kind of see where, like I say, I kind of was a good. Everything ended up becoming a pretty good learning experience in order to be a better producer.
How'd you end up in Pittsburgh?
That was, just a life thing. Um, Seattle was kind of coming to an end for me. My mother had passed away, different things, and we'd sold the house, and my wife's from Pittsburgh, and I was just kind of like, I don't know, there was no scene, nothing was going on. I was just like ready to like, let's just go somewhere. And I didn't know if I'd even keep in the music business. I wasn't even sure, because everything was kind of in a stall, it seemed like, for a bit. And so I just came out here thinking, well, we'll just see how it goes here. And New York and Nashville are close. Like if things happen, I can always, maybe just take trips down there. And I'd done a couple of panels, talks at studios in Nashville, where I met a lot of great people. And I was thinking, all right, people are still kind of interested in some things that I've done, but who knows? And I also thought that, well, technology now, you can kind of work from anywhere. I just didn't really know. Honestly, I was just letting something new happen, and it couldn't have worked out better. When I got here, it's be 4 years. This next week, and when I got here, there was like I was surprised because I wasn't going to look. Of course, I say I'm not going to do anything. I can't help myself, and I'm like, well, where's the studios in this town? And I was surprised that there wasn't as many as I thought there might be, and not of like, really world-class type. I guess I was in Seattle being, a smaller market like Pittsburgh, like we're not huge city. There's like studios on every corner, like 7-Elevens, there's just everything there. And of course, LA, New York and London, Nashville, they're everywhere. And I didn't really realize in some of these other markets that's, wow, it's like there's not rehearsal rooms and there's not recording studios like I was kind of used to. So that was interesting. I thought, well, I don't know what's going to happen here. I don't know what I'm going to do. So I started kind of working on my own stuff, which electronic stuff that I like to do that I never get to do. So just doing that for a while. But then I had heard about a place called The Vault, and I read this article that the guy bought a Neve, and I'm like, and my ears just perked open. I thought, what? I've got to find out about this. And so went out there and contacted him, and just at that time, I was talking to Raj Parashar, who's the brother of Rick, the co-owners of London Bridge, and he had sold, the studio had been sold, and I knew that he was archiving a lot of the Temple of Dogs stuff and different of the old things, because Universal, the labels were now wanting to re-release stuff, and there was royalty debates, as it were, arguments over that. So he was trying to archive all that, and I said, "What are you doing with?" And I knew he had a tape machine to do that. So I asked him what was going on with that. He goes, "Oh, it's just sitting now in my garage," and I'm like, really? You ever sell it? And he goes, I'd probably sell it to you. I go, all right, well, maybe I'll sell it. I just sold a house in Seattle, so I had some money burning in my pocket, thinking, wow, that'd be cool to own. But then I thought, nah, what would I do with it? I got Pro Tools now. What would I do with it? But it would be cool to think of all the great records recorded on them. Called me a week later and said, I talked to my parents, and we think you should have it. I'm like, really? He goes, yeah, if you can get it out, you want to take it, it's here, So I said, what the hell? And I just got a friend to help me and got a U-Haul truck and had it brought out to Pittsburgh. So now it's sitting in my garage in Pittsburgh, and I'm wondering, what do I do with it now? Is this completely useless? Like, what am I going to do with it? It's like a museum piece, but I don't know what to do with it. And so I went to talk to Bob out at the Vault. Bob McCutcheon is the owner of the Vault. I said, and I'm out there and seeing this place, kind of introducing who I am and that I'm new out here and this is what I've done. And he was like, interested in that. And I said, you know what you're missing in the studio? It goes perfectly with the Neve console as a, he goes, what? And I go, a Studer tape machine. And he goes, yeah, well, that would be nice. And I go, I just so happen to have one in my garage, So it was this weird timing. And I didn't hear back from him. And he talked to me a couple of weeks later and said, so do you want to sell that thing? Or what do we? And I go, no, I'm just kind of looking for a home for it. And so we ended up kind of partnering on that. So all of a sudden, I'm working at I have access to a Neve room with the Studer tape machine, which just so happens to be the Studer tape machine that I did Pearl Jam 10 on, and Alice, and all these records. So that was fun for him to have at the studio, and it was a cool setup for me, and it got a home, and here it is in Pittsburgh. Who would have thought? So there's that, and then a couple other places that opened up this last year or two when I got here. So I'm like, I ended up in the right place, and I think just being from out of town and somebody new here was like, I'm showing up, hey, I'd like to work here, we'd like to have you here. So I kind of got a whole new fresh start just being out here, and I think people are more I'm just old hat in Seattle, so it's like I'm old news there. So here it's like maybe people are more interested in working with me. But so yeah, it's been good, and I finally did some of my own music again, and so it was just it's like I got a chance to snap out of a little lull there for a bit.
You're partnered with MVK Music Group.
Yeah, they approached me about they manage a lot of rock bands, and I guess they came to me saying that a lot of them asked like who they were looking for producers and who could they trust and who are real producers, people with some real credits or things like that. So and my friend Pete Klett from Candlebox, guitar player from Candlebox, has now entered the world of producing and engineering, and he's obviously had some success with writing hit songs as well. I saw he was with them, and I said, "What do you yeah, I'm friends with Pete." So they called me, and I said, "Yeah." And then Toby Wright was on this as well, and he'd done some of the Alice stuff, the other Alice EP, and so I said, "Yeah." So they're just basically kind of putting this out there so that new artists might have an opportunity to use producers who have some track record in that kind of field and not be so lost, like who do we use or where do we go, or just even advice or whatever, so it's a nice little partnership.
What have you been doing this past year? Have you gotten some work being we've been kind of like locked down and with the pandemic and stuff? Has it been busy?
I was really lucky. I stayed busy the whole time. I mean it when I say lucky, because there's been times when there was no pandemic and I'm like, what's going on? I need some work, or I want to do something, or so I feel lucky during that time when so many people were hurting for work. I was doing okay, and I decided to build a mix room here, so I had time to work on that and design that. So I built my own studio, but I'm not concentrating on tracking or anything, since there's a number of bigger studios here now in town that weren't before, have great live rooms and tracking rooms. I decided it'd be nice. I was just doing it out of my basement here, and I was thinking, I'd like to have my own separate room where I can just concentrate on mixing and have a little more of a pro setup and vocal booth, little overdub booth. So if we don't, budgets are much smaller these days as it was back in the 90s, where we would have 6-8 weeks in the studio. That if we have a few days only in one of the bigger studios, we can mix it at my place and not be so rushed under the clock and like if there's a vocal part we have to fix or guitar, so I'll have a little bit of that. So I decided to do that. When I was dragging my feet on it for a while, I was like, well, I don't know, music industry, who knows? And I said, what do I get? Who cares? I'll end up hanging out there, So I finally jumped in, and so I started building that. Hopefully, I'll be done here in a month or two. And so that's been really fun for me and a cool project is to sign it from the ground up. And I'm not really a carpenter, so I've been a YouTube carpenter. I believe now you can do anything with YouTube. I think I can fix a car. I can probably build a rocket with YouTube. Um, so I did doing that, and then I did my own record. Not to be kind of cliche with the pandemic thing, I was already kind of doing it, and then but that definitely helped kind of concentrate on that. And but it's not rock at all. It's not even there's maybe a guitar on it somewhere, but it's real experimental and uh, it's like IDM. It's like it's electronic music, but it's all instrumental and not rave music or anything. It's just kind of trippy, experimental, artistic collage of different things and samples and just things I like to nerd out on. Really, is what it is. So I got to do that, which has been on my list forever to kind of do something like that. So I finally got that done, and it's actually coming out July 20th on Vault Records. So the Vault studio I'm working at, Bob has his own label, and so I didn't think he didn't like it because it's not something that it's not what I'm expected to do. But he said, I think people should hear this, so I appreciate that. So it's going to be out on his label. So we'll see. I think we'll see what people think. It's because people are going to totally assume it's going to be hard rock or something, but gotta do what you gotta do, right? I just gotta remind people it's art. You can do different things.
It's a form of expression, you know. Now, how could we get a hold of you if somebody wants to reach out and get you as a producer? Your email or what?
Yeah, I have a website, so it's just Dave Hillis Music. I'm pretty Google friendly. You can find me on that. And so it's Dave Hillis Music, and I have a website where all my contact info and my discography and what I'm working on lately and things like that are all on there.
Is there anything else you'd like to add before we get done here?
No, just I'm looking forward to see where I think music's once again it's in a new transformation. I think all the lines are blurring again, which I like. I think that's cool. I think it'll be interesting to see where it goes in the commerce and how that is going to affect how people are making records and that sort of thing. So no, that's about it, really. But I appreciate you having me on, rehashing all the old stuff.
I want to be free to touch what isn't there. How do we get out of here? It seems useless. I know there is peace, but there is pain. Where do we get our strength to be ourselves? It seems useless. I know there is peace, but there is pain. This world, a bit of hope against what is real. Where lies rule, little ones die.